Welcome everyone to the OCEP Career Pathway Series. My name is Gaby Mota, and I'm currently working as the surgery coordinator at the Orange County Eye Project, to which I'll be referring to as OCEP. That's a common abbreviation we use. I'm also a current pre-med student, and I'll be starting school, med school in the fall, actually. So this is a Q&A series by OCEP where we'll be interviewing those who are at different levels of their careers, and we'll talk to them about their journeys and ask them for words of advice that can make a difference to others on the same path. For our first Q&A, we're very fortunate to have Aidin Spina, who's currently a medical student at UCI and who previously volunteered with OCEP. Aidin has matched into the UCSD Eye Institute and will be starting his ophthalmology residency soon, so congrats to Aidin. We do welcome questions throughout this Q&A, but please put them into the Q&A chat. Go ahead and mention your name and the question, and if your question is chosen, we'll go ahead and be asking that toward the end, sometimes throughout the Q&A series. So this Q&A will be focusing on Aidin's journey so far, what went into it, and where he sees himself after residency. Thank you, Aidin, ahead of time for joining us for this meeting. So since this is going to be mostly students who are medicine focused, we'll go ahead and jump straight into it if you're okay with that.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This is a real full circle moment, so really happy to be here.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you. So we'll go ahead and start with, I think, a question a lot of us like to start with, which is what made you first realize you wanted to pursue medicine?
Yeah, that's a question that you get asked really often throughout your journey in medicine, whether it's as a pre-med, as a medical student, or even as a physician. For me, I think the biggest influence on me was my own mom. Growing up, I saw she's a pediatrician. She works in LA County. She actually works with underserved youth, incarcerated youth specifically in the LA County Juvenile Detention Center, where she practices adolescent medicine. And I constantly saw growing up how involved she was with her work and how much joy she got out of it. Obviously, there's a lot of great things about being a physician, but, growing up in Orange County, seeing her commute to LA, all of those long days, seeing how happy she was after having driven, an hour and a half each way, it really sparked a lot of curiosity in myself. And I think that was definitely the biggest driving force. And as I continued to kind of progress throughout my childhood, I obviously had a big affinity for learning about biology and like different aspects of science. And, I put myself out there in high school by volunteering at my local hospital, Mission Hospital, trying to get as exposed to healthcare as possible. And by the time that I showed up to college, I wasn't like fully set on being a pre-med at the very beginning, but pretty quickly, once I started surrounding myself with other like-minded people, I quickly realized that it was the right path for me. So definitely my mom was the biggest influence for me.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's really nice to hear. And actually, since you bring up your undergrad days, where did you go to undergrad?
Yeah, so I got my undergraduate degree at UC Santa Barbara. So I'm a UC kid through and through. Shout out
Mm.
to California for having the best public school system in the world. So I had a great time. I graduated in 2020.
And what was your major? And how did you
I
come to choose it?
Yeah, so I majored in biochemistry and molecular biology. This was specifically like within the biology department. There was another biochemistry major within the chemistry department, but that was definitely a lot more rigorous academically, and it was
Mhm.
harder to do well in terms of getting good grades, which is definitely really important for getting into medical school. I came in as a pre-chemistry major at UCSB, and then I you have to do like pre-major classes, which are all kind of the same, and so I pivoted to the biochemistry within the bio department a little bit later in my second year. I also minored in Italian studies, so little
Oh,
fun niche there.
so you went to what you were drawn to. I see. Um,
Yeah, I'm a first generation American. My mom is from Iran and my dad is from Italy, and I wanted to, do something that was a little bit closer to home. And like,
yeah.
my motivations for that were wanting to learn Italian so I could communicate with my grandpa. And so that's kind of why I decided to do that.
Oh, that's a really nice connection. I know that you also mentioned that you didn't initially want to go into medical school when you started college. So at what point did you know that it was what you wanted to do?
Yeah, I guess I might have misspoke. It was like on like it was definitely like a thought. Like I was like, I'm
Mm,
interested. I was like pre-med, but I wasn't like that serious about it until my winter quarter of my first year. I ended up joining a pre-medical fraternity at UCSB called Mu Delta.
mm.
That really had a very profound impact on my whole pre-med journey. And I'm sure it'll come up later in terms of like the mentorship role that that played in my journey.
Yeah, I mean, we can go into it now. Is that something you recommend others to pursue?
I definitely would. I think mentorship is probably one of the most important factors in being successful. It's hard to navigate this, whether it's, picking which classes to take, what activities to get involved in, how to study for the MCAT, what resources to use. And joining that organization really provided the structure and, helped me surround myself, like I said, with like-minded individuals who are all
Yeah.
extremely motivated, not only like helping me get through the day to day of my classes, but also like giving me a community and people who I could, like blow off the steam with because it's really stressful being a pre-med student and a medical student. So having those people around you was definitely a very positive um factor, in my journey. So whether it's a pre-medical fraternity, organization, whatever brand or umbrella it wants to fall under. I think joining organizations and surrounding yourself with people that are similar minded is very, very important.
Yeah, definitely. I think especially being first generation, it must have been really important to find others that you could really connect with. Do you
Mhm.
think that this helped you get more involved in like research and volunteering, or was that something you were already doing on your own?
No, it was definitely the big impetus for me because you mean you start college, and I don't know if we have any like high school students on this call, but starting college is a huge transition. You really like you're leaving your home for the first time, you're away from your parents, you have new friends. And I think it's a really stressful environment. You don't really know where to start like focusing your energy. So they definitely put me in contact, through members of the fraternity to the research lab that I ended up joining, helped open some doors in terms of different organizations to get involved with. Networking is also really huge. So if older people in the group organization are doing one thing that they can help open those doors for you, I think that's a really important factor in all of this.
Yeah. And going more into like your research, I know you said they helped you connect you to research. What kind of research was that? What did that look like? The connection and the type of research you pursued.
Yeah, so one of the brothers in the fraternity was involved with one of the PIs at UCSB. His name was Dr. Craig Montel. He's still there. He's a very like profound and prolific neurobiologist. Um, and I really didn't know what I was getting into. I didn't really know what I was doing. I think people feel like there's this urge. Did you feel this like pressure, like, oh, I see other people doing research. I need to do research. And I fell into that, not trap. I mean, it's normal. I mean, that's kind of what gets you involved in it. But I ended up getting really lucky. The postdoc that I worked under was really kind. I felt like I had a good community within the lab, and I really liked the research. It was a lot of like neurobiology with Drosophila, which are fruit flies, and then mosquitoes, looking at different disease vectors and things like that. I'm not going to sit here and say I did the most like profound or prolific research myself. A lot of it is, bench work, helping move the studies along. But I think at every given point in our career, there's going to be times where you kind of have to do some scut work and some basic work, and that's okay. I think you need to learn skills, learn how to kind of navigate these fields, how to again network with people and figure out what you're doing. Looking back on it, I wouldn't have changed anything for myself personally, but the advice that I would probably give people is that if you want something that's going to be super productive, if you're at a school that does have clinical research and you really want to go to medical school, I would recommend clinical research more times than not over basic science and translational research, because it can often be more productive. And instead of networking with PhDs, who do a lot of really great research, you'd be working sometimes with medical doctors, whether that's MDs or DOs. So I think those connections can be a little bit more fruitful down the line.
Yeah, definitely. I know that, like you said, it kind of feels like a pressure, and I definitely felt that pressure too, as an undergrad. But do you think that it's important when you're trying to pursue research to find something that you like, or because I know some people have that question too, is it just should I
Mhm.
be participating in research, or should I also find something I'm interested in?
I would highly recommend finding something you're passionate about. I think not only does that help you perform better and, put more effort in because you genuinely care, not that you can't put effort into something that you're not interested in, but it definitely helps add a little bit more fuel to the fire. And then it helps you talk about it more. I think that's one thing that I did better from a medical school perspective is I found research or I created research that I wanted to do. And
Mhm.
I was able to speak much more elaborately and passionately about that during my interviews and write about it from a like more nuanced perspective with more of my own personal background and flair to it rather than just something I joined and hopped into. Again, not that there's anything wrong with that because I was able to get into medical school by doing that type of research, but if I were to go back, I think I would tell myself to be a little bit more patient with that whole process, and find the projects that speak to me. That's way easier said than done. Sometimes opportunities are very hard to come by, so you might feel some pressure to jump onto the first thing. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I would encourage people to pursue opportunities. And if you can't find them, maybe try to create them yourself. Again, easier said than done, but things that you're passionate about will definitely go farther. And that also applies to things outside of research as well, like volunteering or other organizations that you get involved with.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm just looking at the questions in the Q&A too. Long John's, I'm so sorry, I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, is an MS2, and I think you already answered their question. But another relevant question to research experience, asked by Amanda Fang, is did your undergraduate research experience influence your clinical interests when entering medical school? I know you mentioned briefly your clinical research that you're doing. Can you go more into depth into that while also answering this question?
Yeah, so to directly answer Amanda's question, not really. It didn't. My undergraduate research was one project was looking at like whether a certain, like if socializing flies before they were essentially like put on a heating pad to test their pain perception would like impact their pain perception. I don't do any pain medicine research, or I'm not going into pain medicine. It was just, and I didn't know I was going to go into ophthalmology, or I didn't even know really what ophthalmology was as an undergrad. I thought the lab was really cool when I joined it. I had the connection, and I really liked neuroscience in undergrad, so I really gravitated to it for those reasons. Outside of that, though, in terms of like the follow-up to your question was, can you just repeat that so I'm not like diverting too much?
Um, Telling us about your current research and that, because you mentioned it briefly, so I wanted to see if you could go into
Mm.
depth with it a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely. So I think the biggest research endeavor that I did was a lot of artificial intelligence, large language model research, looking at addressing low health literacy through applying AI. This really looked at it was a large consortium of projects. I basically ended up co-founding a research group at UCI called the Comprehend Lab. It started off with my roommate and I around this time of our, I was literally talking to someone about this earlier today. It was in March 3 years ago as a first year medical student. ChatGPT had been out for a couple of months. We were playing with it. We were like, wow, this is magical. And over those first couple of months, we started asking ourselves, okay, how can we utilize this in medicine? And one thing we landed on pretty early on was, oh, we can utilize this to help educate patients because it's such a dynamic tool. Then we started looking at, okay, how can we design studies to bring this into the clinic to kind of validate it as a tool? We were first year med students. Gabby, you'll see when you get there. Sometimes you get a little bit in over your head. You're like, okay, we want to get into the clinic. We want to put this in front of patients. And then we realize
Yeah.
well, yeah, no IRB is going to approve this. Like ChatGPT had literally come out like 3 months prior. So we went back to the drawing board, and instead of doing clinical studies, we decided to do some preclinical validation studies. So we
Mhm.
looked at first ChatGPT's ability to customize text to different education levels, like reading levels, and there's a lot of great quantifiable metrics like grade level calculators and things like that. We then looked at its ability to simplify complex medical texts that patients might interact with while maintaining the same content accuracy. We call this content fidelity. So we found some proprietary like linguistic algorithms that helped us quantitatively do that. Then we looked at translation. We looked at how this influences like social media interactions, and we published a bunch of manuscripts. I think now we're at like 6 or 8 manuscripts in this space just from that lab group alone. And now we're actually in the clinic. So um, going back all the way to our original dream of, getting an IRB approved study. We had a very like large IRB that was approved, and we're doing just that.
Well, that's awesome. And I think something important to note here for those who are undergrads is that when you start research, it takes a lot longer than you think. And
Hmm.
that was something definitely that I learned. You have to have a lot of patience, and it's going back to the drawing board a lot. So do keep that
Yeah.
in mind. Um, I guess I'll go ahead and move forward a little bit onto more so shadowing. I'm not sure if you
Hmm.
mentioned shadowing at all. Did you shadow? I
I
know, like, I don't know if
did.
you shadowed your mom maybe because you said she was a pediatrician or a
Yeah, it was
different
actually really
pathway.
difficult to do that because she works basically in like a juvenile detention center, which is a
Oh,
fancy and politically correct way to say like a prison,
mm,
for underserved youth. So I couldn't shadow her. I would hear a bunch of stories. She would come back and tell me about these kids, who were just born and grew up in the wrong situation through no fault of their own. And life had really served them an unjust, like unfair set of cards, and she was there to do her best to care for them and address their health needs. It's really like the ultimate picture of social determinants of health at times.
yeah,
So that was a big, eye-opening series of events. We talk every night over dinner about these things. But in terms of shadowing, like I shadowed sparingly throughout college and like during my gap years. But it wasn't a huge part of my application. I think it's important for pre-med students to shadow, definitely, because you need to make sure you know what you're getting into. Have conversations with physicians, understand what they like about their job, what they don't like about their job. Medicine is not black and white. Excuse me. There are a lot of pros and a lot of cons, and I think different physicians can open students' eyes to those things, whether it's, the amount of time you spend in school and training, the amount of debt that you can accumulate, the difficulty of the career path. I think it's mainly a tool for students to really be sure that they're getting into the right field. I don't, it's a passive process though. So I think if you
yeah,
put too much effort into that, you could be taking away that time that could be used actively, like volunteering, working a clinical job as either like an EMT, a scribe, or a medical assistant, or doing research. So I think there are more active things that one can do with their time. But definitely do shadow, use it as a tool to kind of like explore different fields and confirm to yourself that medicine is the right career path for you.
so in terms, I know you said like shadowing in general, but do you think someone who is sort of sure they want to stick to ophthalmology, do you think they should stick to shadowing only ophthalmology or they should also spread out?
Um, I think it's good to see some variety. As someone like I found ophthalmology pretty early on in medical school, but I always tried to keep an open mind. One, ophthalmology is extremely competitive, and sometimes that can boil down to like what medical school you get into. Certain schools have an easier time matching students than others. That's unfortunately just the name of the game. But I think it's really good. Medicine is a very diverse field. Like there are so many different subspecialties, specialties. So especially as a pre-med, I wouldn't necessarily advise putting all your eggs in one basket. I think it can somewhat, if they, not that a AdCom is going to look at it and be turned off by it, but you want to know that you want to be a doctor first and foremost before you're like,
Mm,
I want to be an ophthalmologist. Like you're going to medical school, you're getting your MD to be a physician. And then once you're done with medical school, you become an ophthalmologist, you go through that training. So they kind of want to see that breadth, I think, a little bit.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I know that I'm told often that a lot of med students come into med school thinking, I want to do this specialty, but then they end up coming out with something completely different. So
Yeah.
I think keeping an open mind is also very important.
Mhm.
So moving on a little bit, um, more so to your volunteering with OCEP.
Mhm.
I know that you volunteered with us before we moved to our current location in Santa Ana. So I
Mhm.
wanted to ask what initially motivated you to volunteer with us?
Yeah, I mean, I found out about the clinic through UC Irvine's ophthalmology interest group. They do a great job of like organizing us like the opportunity to go on Saturdays. Back when it was only Saturdays, I don't know now. I think they open it up now to like the surgical clinic too. I've seen some of the MS2s and MS3s join you guys.
Yeah.
Um, I really just wanted to see what it was like. Like I hadn't spent any time. OSEP was my first time like really shadowing an ophthalmologist in clinic. I had spent some time in an OR with some of our physicians at Gavin Herbert, but I
Yeah.
hadn't seen it in clinic. And I really like working with underserved communities. Again, like harkening back to my mom's influence on me, I think that's where I derive a lot of like the meaning. And not that it's you don't get meaning from working with patients that aren't underserved, but I think it really like hits home and you feel like you're having a really profound impact. So when I heard about the opportunity, I kind of jumped right on it. I started pretty early on in my MS1 career, and I volunteered pretty consistently from MS1 and then a little bit in MS2 as well. It was just, it becomes more difficult as school becomes a little bit more time consuming and
Yeah.
competitive, and research gets involved and all this stuff. But yeah, through the ophthalmology interest group, if we have any UCI students on this call, they definitely are aware of that. It's a really great opportunity.
So by the time that you joined this interest group, did you already have like an idea that you wanted to do ophthalmology, or you were still like in the early stages of choosing the specialty or leaning
So
towards it?
the advice that was given to me by my dean scholar, which is basically like your clinical teacher at UC Irvine, Dr. Ariana Nelson, shout out to her. She's amazing. She's an anesthesiologist, but she told me you need to rule out the competitive specialties early. Those competitive specialties being neurosurgery, dermatology, plastic surgery, ophthalmology, orthopedic surgery, ENT, like the urology, the ones that it's not a guarantee. You can't just like pivot last minute and match into. Um, I knew I didn't want to do plastics or derm. I kind of like was iffy about ENT. I shadowed an ophthalmologist pretty early on, Dr. Austin Fox at the Gavin Herbert Eye Institute, who's one of my closest mentors. And I remember the first time that I saw cataract surgery being done, I was like, wow, this is beautiful. I shadowed him in the OR a handful of times. And by that time, I had like made my way to OSEP. And I was pretty like, I knew what I wanted out of medicine. I knew I
Yeah.
wanted something that was outpatient. I knew I wanted something that was very subspecialized. I don't like juggling a lot of problems. I like to focus on one thing, and I want to be able to know I'm making a difference. And I know ophthalmologists have a lot of really great surgeries that are not only efficient, but they're really successful. Cataract surgery is the most commonly done surgery in the world, and it has, fantastic outcomes. You have a very profound impact in patients' lives, like restoring sight, whether that's through treating diabetic retinopathy, AMD, even just doing cataract surgery. Like you have so many conversations with patients after you've taken out a very visually significant cataract that are just like, wow, I didn't realize my vision was this like obscured. I didn't realize, how it was affecting my quality of life until after the surgery was done. All of those things really spoke to me. So about like a third of the way through medical school, I was like, okay, do I want to do ophthalmology or orthopedic surgery? I have an uncle who's an orthopedic surgeon in Orange County, and he was very much so like, you should do ortho. You can join my practice, you can take over it, which is a very enticing offer.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I really felt like my soul was calling me to be an ophthalmologist. So I was like, okay, I'm going to push like 90% of my eggs into this basket and just kind of go for it from there. And it ended up working out. Like I have no regrets. I'm extremely happy to be going into this field. I personally think it's the best field in medicine, but everyone has different opinions, which is great because we need everyone in every field. We need people who want to be passionate family medicine physicians. We need people who want to be passionate orthopedic surgeons. Everyone has their own styles and what they like out of their job. And I found that my personality and my desires for what I want out of my career perfectly aligned with ophthalmology.
Yeah, I can really tell you're passionate about it. It radiates off the way that you explain it. I know that along your journey, you said you were like exploring. Did you volunteer in other clinics or hospitals to do so, like the other specialties, or you mostly just stuck to ophthalmology or OSEP, I should say?
I've shadowed a handful of others like physicians at UCI, but honestly, like once I shadowed, Dr. Nelson told me about ophthalmology. She kind of explained it. I was like, I like eyes. I think some people have a very visceral reaction to eyes. I tell people I'm going into ophthalmology, 80% of them be like, ooh, eyeballs gross me out. I'm like, that's fine. Make it a little bit easier for me to get into the specialty. Because it's already competitive enough. But once I found it, I
Mhm.
was like, I don't really feel the urge to check out anything else. It might have been a little bit short-sighted for me, but I knew. Like, I feel like you kind of know. I had the same thing when I met my wife. I was like, I know I like you, and I really like. I know you trust your gut. Like it really comes down to that at the end of the day. And she gave me that advice. I checked it out. I was like, wow, this is really awesome. The only other thing that was a maybe was ortho. So I spent a little bit more time with my uncle, like really like asking him questions about, his practice, what orthopedic training is like, what it's like, doing that on a day to day. And I was like, ophthalmology really seems my speed. So
That's a really funny analogy. So now you know, guys, when you're going to choose your specialty, it's similar to choosing your partner.
yeah.
So now that we've talked about like volunteering and shadowing and research, do you think that someone who's applying to medical school should try to get experience in all three? Do you think one is more important than the other? I know you expressed that shadowing is something on the lower end, but between like volunteering and research, where would you rank those two?
I mean, they're kind of equal, honestly. I think people need to be honest with themselves and ask themselves what type of medical school they want to go to. If they're a person who's coming from like a very if you're coming from UCI or like a UCLA for undergrad and you've got really great grades and you've done the MCAT really well and you're like, I want to go to a really competitive medical school. Not that you have to, but if you're like, that's what you want to do and your vision aligns with that, a lot of those institutions are very research focused and they're very research driven. So I think that might give research a slight leg up in that regard. But I think it comes back to what we were talking about earlier in the passions. What are you passionate about? What is like, who are you and what do you want to do with your career and with your life? Don't be checking boxes just to check the boxes. I know people say that and it used to bother me a lot. You do need to check the boxes. You need to do some research. You need to do some volunteering. You need to do some shadowing. But once you've kind of done that and shown that you can navigate those spaces, I would really encourage people to do what they're passionate about, what they're going to pour their heart and their soul into. Because, if someone really likes volunteering with underserved communities, they're going to be more likely to show up to every single Saturday event. They're going to be more likely to build relationships with the leaders in those positions, and they're going to
Yeah.
be more likely to become the leaders themselves. And then when it comes to their application, they can talk about this progression. Like, I really liked volunteering here, so I showed up all the time. Then I started my own initiative within the volunteering service. Then I got a leadership position within. Then I became the president, and I continued that thing that I started throughout
Yeah.
longitudinally. For me in med school, that thing, like, I didn't really have that in my med school application. I think what really helped me get into medical school were my grades and my MCAT score personally. Um, but in medical school, what I think like really helped me thrive was I just followed my passion. I was like, I'm really into this AI research. I'm really into like figuring out how we can utilize this to help educate patients. And we just kind of kept pressing. We made one manuscript and they're like, okay, what's the next iteration? And what's the next iteration? And how can we keep building on this to where we founded a lab where we have now first year medical students working in it. We have second year medical students working with us. We've got anesthesiologists working, orthopedic surgeons, spine surgeons,
Yeah.
ophthalmologists. We were able to build it up. And I think that really resonates with people when they're
Yeah.
reading an application and when they're listening to you talk during an interview.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that I did that personally, and I really was able to speak about it in my application and during my interviews, and the interviewers can tell. So I
Mhm.
think it's very important to be passionate about what it is that you speak about in your application.
And just what
There,
you do with your time. Like, I'm never going to say do more research than volunteering. Do what you're passionate
yeah,
about. Do a little bit of both, but really put your energy into what you're passionate about, and that will come through and that will allow you to be more successful.
I think your gut's also going to tell you too what you like more.
Exactly.
Yeah. There are some questions in the chat that I think relate to this. The first is asked by Jordan Tang. He asks what you think helped made you stand out when you applied to medical school.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think my research was pretty good. I think if I'm going to be completely honest, my objective stats were fantastic. Like I had a great MCAT score, a very good GPA. I came from a good undergraduate institution. Um, I had done some pretty good research. I didn't have any publications out of it, but it was something that I had done for 3 years. So it was like a longitudinal experience that I was able to kind of like talk about, worked on multiple projects, got a letter of recommendation from that researcher. And I also took a class with him so he could speak about me from multiple aspects. I did some, some volunteer work. It wasn't like my big passion in undergrad, but I did volunteer work. I think I was a very well-rounded applicant. Other than my grades and my MCAT score, I don't think anything like really stood out. Like objectively looking back on it now, I think if you were to ask me when I was applying to med school, I'd be like, I'm the best applicant ever, all this stuff. But I think I could have been more like following my passions, taking more roles for leadership and like really
Yeah.
pushing myself. But I think my academic success kind of really carried me.
Yeah. And kind of pivoting onto that, what was like the time frame when you decided that you were ready to apply? Did you apply straight out of college or you gave yourself a few gap years?
Yeah, so I took 2 gap years. I knew because if you're going to apply straight out, you basically have to have taken the MCAT and submit your application by the end of your third year of college. I wasn't mature enough to do that. I went to school at UCSB. It has a party school. I had a good time in college. I feel like I really optimized work-life balance, work hard, play hard. Like I enjoyed my time. I think one thing that like we can get caught up in this rat race that is medicine, but one thing that you'll never have is your youth again. And I really didn't want to like lose that. And I wanted to have fun. I wanted to build memories and like really enjoy my time in college. I think UCSB is the best college on this planet. Like you're literally living right on the ocean in a square mile at a fantastic academic institution. The community, the culture, everything. So I really like poured my heart and soul into Isla Vista and UCSB. And I have no regrets about that. But by the time like I wasn't going to take my MCAT until that summer going from junior to senior year. So I wasn't going to apply straight out regardless. That was never a plan. But the question was, okay, do I prepare an application during my fourth year of school and like just take one gap year, or do I take two? And I kind of came to the conclusion that I wasn't really like mature enough. I was still like in IV. It's not real life. College is not real life. So I wasn't grounded, and I think that would have held me back. And I had a couple of friends that applied. One, like, didn't get in the first time. The other one, I think, could have gotten into better med schools if they had waited a little bit longer. But, life goes on, and I felt very comfortable with my decision. It worked out from a pandemic perspective because I graduated and, I moved back in with my parents
Yeah.
for about a year and a half. And yeah, I mean, I wasn't ready, and I knew I wasn't ready. I think everyone needs to be honest with themselves and just enjoy the
Definitely.
journey. Like you can't expect to only be happy once you're an attending physician. And I think you need to be able to take your time and enjoy undergrad, enjoy any gap year or years you take. Try to enjoy medical school. As hard as it was for me, I can look back on it now and be like, I really did enjoy for the most part, other than a couple of months here and there that were really stressful. I really enjoyed medical school. I grew a lot. I matured as a person, and I didn't feel like I had to put my life on pause because I decided to become a doctor.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, to those listening, that's really good advice. You really need to have that balance between school and your social life because if there's no balance, it's gonna tip one way and it's not gonna be so good for you. Um, I guess moving more into like the preparing for med school, since we're going that route, do you think you can give us tips on how you prepared for the MCAT as well? Did you do something differently? I know you said you did really well, and this was actually
Mhm,
one of my favorite questions to ask when I went to any panels is like, and I think a lot of people are like, what do you do for the MCAT? Because it's like
mhm.
a really scary exam that a lot of us haven't taken. So what is your um opinion on that?
Yeah, I think one thing that can help people is just kind of reframing it. I think people kind of like view it as this like impossible exam that's like this giant behemoth but it's just one part of your journey. You're always going to have a bigger test that's coming up. Like you take the MCAT, great, you do well. What do you have? Step one. Okay, that's a really hard test. You have to pass that one. What do you have after that? Step two. That score really matters. Like, you know what I mean? And then, oh, then you have your boards and you have your in-service exam. So it's never ending. So if you can reframe it instead of it being like this obstacle to getting into med school, it's just
Yeah.
another part of the journey. Um, in terms of how I did well, I think being the first thing starts with your educational foundation, even going back to like when you grow up. The cars section is like, how much reading did you do as a kid? I didn't do that much reading as a kid, like outside of what was like I took AP Lit, AP Lang, like I was a good student. I did well on those tests. But I was never a passionate reader, and that showed up on my cars section. Like that was the one section I didn't do like perfect on, like it's okay.
Yeah.
But throughout undergrad, take your studies seriously. Like try to do well on all of your classes. You're going to have to take your prereqs. So like really learn biology with intention, learn chemistry with intention. If you can build those foundations, it makes the MCAT like 10 times easier because you're not having to learn everything for the first time. A lot of it is just relearning things and approaching it. On that same vein, then once you get to studying for the MCAT itself, don't put too much time into pure content review where you're just watching videos or you're just reading the Kaplan books. I think for the way I did it, is I spent out of like I think it was about 12 weeks that I studied, 11 to 12 weeks. The first 3.5 weeks were content reviews. So I spent most of those days just doing the Kaplan books. I would read them, excuse me, and then like take little notes, nothing like that in depth, highlight them, just try to refresh my memory because it had been like, 2.5 years since I took Gen Chem, a year and a half since I had taken physics. OChem was like a year out. So brushing up. I think students oftentimes spend too much time in that phase. They're like, I don't know chemistry. I can't start taking questions because I don't know it. Those content review things, whether it's watching videos or reading books, that's what I consider passive learning. You're just reading something, trying to absorb information. At the end of the day, what is the MCAT? The MCAT is a test. And what is a test made of? It's made of questions. So, how do you practice for a test that's made of questions? You do questions. So, I think students need to take more practice exams than they're taking. I took 13 during that time. That's overkill. I think if you can take anywhere from 8 to 10 practice tests, that's where you need to be. Okay. You need to get those numbers up. Um, Additionally, UWorld was a huge resource for me. So when I wasn't doing practice questions, like basically the last 9 weeks of my MCAT studying was just doing UWorld questions and doing
Yeah.
practice tests. I think that is how you learn. That's how you're actively engaging with the information. It's a learning tool. It's okay to get questions wrong, but you have to just do questions and do questions. Don't spend as much time as you think you need reviewing them. Review the core concept and move on. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's my core mantra. Take as many questions, do as many questions as you can. Don't rush through them and like do a half-baked job. Be intentional, but practice, practice, practice. Because at the end of the day, what are you doing? You're taking a test. So you answering questions. If you're not practicing answering questions, then you're not going to do well on the exam because you haven't seen everything. Um, a couple more notes on the MCAT because I could talk about this for hours. I actually used to teach for Blueprint as well. That was one of my gap year jobs. So I was a Blueprint MCAT tutor and live instructor. So I did like the whole class thing as well. Um, I think taking timed and simulated exams with like test day conditions, which means like you're eating the same meals, you're drinking the same amount of water, you're having the same caffeine, is really important because you want to be able to simulate that. So on test day, you know what you're doing. It's like doing scrimmages, It's like think about it like a sport. If you're a basketball, soccer, or baseball player, you want to practice, you want to shoot your free throws, you want to get in practice, like you're shooting shots just like you would in a game. And then your practice tests, your practice games, you want them to look like the actual game. So wake up at the same time, set a timer, your phone's in the other room, you're eating the same lunch, you're having the same snacks. That stuff matters. You want to control for all of that. And when you find that system, you carry that system. Like that allowed me to do well on step one, pass step one, and do really, really well on step two. So I don't know. I could talk about that for hours.
That's really important advice because when I was studying and I would do practice questions, I could not have caffeine. The caffeine
Mm,
would make me jittery and give me a lot of anxiety. So definitely figuring out your conditions is really important when studying for the MCAT. And I know that like this whole process, I mean, not just the MCAT, but like preparing, it can be very stressful.
mhm.
During those moments where you might have felt like this, what motivated you to keep going even when things weren't going as planned? What did you do to manage your stress?
Yeah, again, it comes back to connections and like building that support system. So, two of my best friends from my pre-med fraternity were taking the MCAT with me that summer. Not only were we like texting every day, sharing resources, asking each other for tips and tricks, figuring out how to use Anki together, things like that. But we actually went to Oregon for like 10 days to stay with one of my friends and we studied together. And it was kind of like half studying, half like just blowing off some steam, enjoying each other's company. Um, I think that's really important. So if you can, again, surround yourself with like-minded individuals, I think you hear this a lot growing up when you're a kid, but you are like a representation of who you surround yourself with. You want to surround yourself with like-minded, high achieving individuals who are, empathetic and can be there for you, but also push you and keep you at your best. And I don't think I would have, I know I wouldn't have been as successful if I didn't have those two with me throughout the MCAT. And same goes for my success in medical school. Like my best friend and my roommate for 3 years in med school was someone that I did all my AI research with. We studied together all the time. Um, Surround yourself with people who are going to help, who want to see you succeed and who you want to see succeed so you can help build each other up. That support and that community really goes far. We're humans at the end of the day. Our relationships are, I think, the most important things in our lives. And
Yeah.
when you can kind of tie that into what you're doing, whether that's school, training, or just life in general, it really helps you be successful and happy.
Definitely. So I know we've been focusing mostly on like undergrad days. I think we should move a little bit toward residency. I know we have a few med students in here. We
Mhm.
talked a bit about your choice into ophthalmology. I know you mentioned starting very early on and like volunteering, but how early do you think students should realistically be starting to prepare for residency, or what does that look like
I
for
would definitely
most?
just echo the advice that Dr. Nelson gave me as a first year medical student. I would start by ruling out competitive specialties. The last thing you want is to realize halfway through MS3 or like 3/4 of the way through your third year when you need to start applying or putting together your application that you're interested in dermatology, that you're interested in plastic surgery. Even if you're not, like it's okay to pivot. People pivot all the time. I'm not saying it's impossible, but if you want to give yourself the biggest advantage or make it as like less, I'm not going to say easy because it's not easy, but like not give yourself undue challenges, approach it from the perspective of I need to just rule that out. Because if you're like spending your entire time being like, oh, I'm going to go into, and not that it's easy to match into any specialty, but there are objective metrics. Like it is easier to match into family medicine, pediatrics, internal medicine. And if you're not pushing yourself because you're like have that security blanket, and then you realize, oh, I want to do something more competitive. Well, now you're looking at potentially having to take a gap year to do research, which is expensive. It's difficult. Nothing's guaranteed. So I would just advise people to like look at the competitive stuff. I'm not saying you need to commit to it, but see if you're interested in it. And if you are interested in something like neurosurgery or derm or ophthalmology, get involved in those departments. Worst case scenario, you realize during your third year that you want to be an internist and you want to do internal medicine residency. Great.
Mhm.
You've done all of this extraordinary research. You've really pushed yourself academically. And now you're going to match into the best programs in the country. You have your pick of the litter. So I think it's better to go gung ho at the beginning and really push yourself and then be able to fall back on some of those like less again, nothing wrong with those specialties. I loved all of my rotations. Weren't for me, but it just gives you more opportunities without giving yourself undue stress.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's also a question in the chat that is associated to residency.
Mhm.
I'm so sorry if I say your name incorrectly, Kong Zhao. They ask, hey, Aidin, I just wanted to know what you felt was the most impactful experience or activity you did that helped you match into ophthalmology.
I think again, I did a lot. Like, I'm not going to sit here and simplify my application only to the Comprehend Lab. I think that's the single most important one because that's the one where I had the most onus and leadership. Like, my roommate and I, it was born in our apartment as first year medical students. Like, we came up with those ideas. We approached our classmates and got them to buy in. We approached attending physicians and got them to buy in. Other things I did, I was involved with OCEP, obviously. I was involved in another research lab that was basic science, Dr. Christoph Palczewski. So I did that for the summer going into my second year of medical school. I was involved with Dr. Donnie Sa. I went on a couple medical missions to Ensenada where we, did vision screenings, a bunch of like the other health screenings for underserved communities over there. Those are some of the big ones, but I think the biggest one was my work with the Comprehend Lab. And ophthalmology is a very research-driven field. There's like a whole subsection just for research and publications. And I think having been so passionate about that, that really helped me.
You. I think we'll actually start moving into the questions from the Q&A chat
Okay.
since we have about 16 minutes left and there's six more questions. Um, so this is an anonymous attendee that's asking, what components of your application do you think help out most? They're applying for this upcoming cycle. What are things you wish you would have uh, known about away rotation slash the application process?
Um, It's a good question. I feel very fortunate. I had some great mentors. He might volunteer. He used to volunteer there himself, Christopher Yang. He's a ophthalmology. He's an intern right now, but he's an ophthalmology resident at UCI. Um, he gave me a lot of really great information. I think for the application process, away rotations, the biggest thing. I knew this, but something that I echo is like be on top of it when the application's open. Try to have everything prepared, and send it in on time. They're very coveted commodities. Everyone wants the away rotation spots. I did 3 away rotations. They were very expensive. Um, so be prepared financially to, shell out some cash, whether it's for apartments, flights, food, other things, renting a car. I did one at University of Michigan, another one at UCLA, and then I went to Duke. So like they were kind of all over the place. So be prepared. They can be a little lonely at times. You're kind of outside of your comfort zone, but they're really great experiences. They really help you meet new people and network at different institutions. They give you better opportunities to match at those places if you're able to do well. My advice would be prepared for your applications. Keep an eye on VSLO or VSAS, whatever you refer to it as there. Um, and you just be prepared and send those in and be flexible with your schedule. Um, and have some take out extra loans if you need to. I'm not saying you need to. I didn't have to yeah, because I was a little bit strategic with how I did things, but they are expensive. So just realize that like they can be like I think my rent for Michigan was like 1,500 for the month. At Duke, I spent like 1,000 for the rent and like $900 to rent a car. Things really pile up. So just be aware of that.
Oh man, that sounds a little frightening.
It's fun though. I had a really good time. I learned a lot. I met some really great people. I would do it again in a heartbeat. Like it was stressful at times, but everyone in ophthalmology is so nice. Like I had friends who were doing them in neurosurgery and in orthopedic surgery, and they were getting worked like dogs. Like it's not
Oh,
like that in ophthalmology.
yeah.
It's like really not. There's like no expectations to have known anything. Like obviously when you do know stuff and you can shine, it helps you look better. But
Yeah.
it's a fantastic field and you will have a good time on them and on the rotation. So
Thank you, anonymous attendee, for your question. We have another anonymous attendee. This question is more so to the research. Did you teach yourself Python slash R, or did you partner with a CS student to do research that looks very CS heavy?
yeah, it's a great question. I didn't teach myself Python or R. I taught myself how to use IBM SPSS, which is like a statistics program that's not super coding involved. And then I used GraphPad Prism for some of the, like the smaller analysis and like figure generation. Those both require some payment, so just be aware. I think GraphPad was like $140 for the year, and SPSS was like $30 for 6 months. But one of my colleagues, my medical student friends, was very well versed in coding. So networking, again, if you can't figure out something, meet someone who can, bring them in. Everyone help each other out. It's all about building each other up and like bringing each other with yourself. So yeah, I'm not the best at coding. I've got a little bit of background in it, but I mainly just finding people who I can work with and, bringing them onto the team.
Yeah, partnerships are really good to have. I personally don't know how to code at all, so don't bring me near a
Everyone just
computer.
vibe codes now. I vibe coded something and it worked. And then I brought it to one of my friends who actually is like a machine learning expert and he kind of helped me like get it off the ground.
Yeah.
So
We'll go ahead and move on to the next question, which is by Luis de la Cruz. He says, "Hello, Gabby and Aidin. I'm Luis, a former OSEP coordinator a few years ago. You mentioned earlier that unfortunately the medical school you end up at might dictate how successful you are at matching into ophtho. What advice would you give to a med student aiming for ophthalmology who might have limited mentors in ophtho and or no home residency program?"
Yeah, that's a great question, Luis. I I think networking as well as you can. So obviously, if you're a former OSEP coordinator, you people, if you work with OSEP, like there are other ways to get connections other than your medical school. Obviously, like it is more challenging, but I know that there are students from other schools, specifically one that comes to mind here in Southern California is CUSM. And I know they matched three people into ophthalmology this past year. I was speaking to a current student there a couple of weeks ago. Um, I think it's just being as resourceful as possible, reaching out to people into the community. If there is another medical school in the area that does have an ophthalmology department, trying to get involved with their department, any faculty there. Um, it's more difficult, but definitely not impossible. So just trying to be as resourceful as you can. I don't really have like, I think the best advice. I think that would probably be it. But reaching out to the connections you do have and being persistent, like don't let anything get in your way. If it's your dream and you want to do it, you'll figure out a way to do that, whether that's taking a gap year and doing a research year at an institution with one. Obviously, maybe financially that's not ideal, but there are plenty of programs that offer paid positions. There is like a website or a resource like a Google Sheet. Right now, they're all post-match scrambling to fill these positions, and I think they mostly are, but there are a lot of different programs throughout the country that offer paid research positions. So I think that's a good way. If you're looking, you're like, I'm willing to take an extra year, whatever it takes, that would be a good option. But just like I said, being resourceful and trying to do everything you can.
Thank you, Irene. Next question in the Q&A, asked by Priya Kumar, what did you do during the two gap years?
Yeah, so I knew I needed clinical experience. I didn't really do much of that other than some volunteering, which wasn't like paid or like other clinical experience. So I know I needed to be like with patients. I needed to be able to talk about that because medical schools want to know that you know what you're getting yourself into and you're familiar with patients. So I moved back in with my parents. During the pandemic, I actually had a really hard time finding a job, which was kind of frustrating. I was like, I have a bachelor's degree from like a great school and I can't get a job. So it took me like 3 months post grad to find one, but I ended up I worked as a medical assistant and scribe in a dermatology office, which is why I realized I didn't want to do derm. But I loved my office. I loved my gap year job. I just realized like as a physician, I didn't want to be a dermatologist. That's basically all I did was just work. The
No,
country kind of shut down. I was in Southern Orange County. There wasn't like I guess I could have gotten involved in some clinical research at UCI, but I was working and applying to med school. Applying to med school is like a full-time job in and of itself. So between that and my actual full-time job, I was very busy. So that was really where I put most of my time.
I'm with you too on the difficulty finding a job after. So look out, guys. I was very fortunate to land at OSEP, but it did take me a few months. Thank you,
Yeah.
Priya. Um, the next question comes from Julia Jackman. Thanks for talking to us. Medical school doesn't allocate much time to teaching about the eye. How did you fill this gap to perform well on your ophthalmology rotations?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, so the way I did it, like I did a 1 month rotation as the third year at UCI in ophthalmology because I knew I was going to go into it like with 90 at that point, like 99% certainty. So that was a great resource. I didn't really take full advantage of it. It was mostly shadowing. I could have been a little bit more hands-on. But I think I did a good enough job. There are a lot of great online resources though. So I think what ended up happening is after I took step two, I had my UCI home ophthalmology rotation. I was with Dr. Fox and Dr. Farid. I know Dr. Farid volunteers at OSEP quite often, and she's
That's
amazing, like
amazing. Yes.
amazing, amazing. Like I'd give an arm and a leg to come back and do fellowship at UCI if I decided to do cornea. Um, and they were really great about teaching me, letting me see patients. Dr. Fox specifically, like really loved like sitting down and like running the list after clinic and kind of going over things. I would ask him like, hey, can I practice like interpreting this visual field progression or looking at this OCT nerve? But in terms of a lot of it was self-taught. So a lot of it was finding resources in terms of a didactic perspective, like resources like iGuru was really good. Um, there is this thing called the Will's Eye Manual that I basically found a way to like make it more digestible for me because it can be a little bit dense. Um, there was The Eyes Have It, which is something on one of the Michigan rotations I was exposed to, which it's a website that was created by one of the Michigan faculty there. There's OCT. If you Google like OCT practice, there's a website that kind of helps you learn how to read OCTs. The Mass Eye and Ear Infirmary has like an illustrative book that I thought was really useful. But iGuru was the most important one, I think. Tim Root's Ophtho book was really important. Um, and the Will's Eye Manual, the Eyes Have It. Those were the big resources. I think you really kind of have to go out of your way. And then in terms of like learning the exam skills, you just got to ask to see patients. You got to advocate for yourself. Make sure you're not like throwing off the clinic flow because it's really difficult. The clinics are very busy, as I'm sure you guys have seen at OCEP. The volume is really high, so you don't want to be like a nail in everyone's side and like disrupting the clinic flow. But if you get the opportunity to examine a patient, do it. If you're not getting opportunities to ask, but ask so in a way that's not disrupting the flow. And then once you're doing it, ask them to help you like the technique. For example, for the longest time, I was having the hardest time viewing the nerve with a 90 diopter lens at the slit lamp. And I realized one thing that I wasn't doing was like anchoring my elbow onto the table and then using my like fingers properly as a fulcrum on the head. Having that stability is like super important. And that's something that I wouldn't really like have thought of until Dr. Fox is like, hey, make sure you're anchoring your elbow. Cause he was like looking at me before I was like, it was floating around all up here, but if it's anchored, it's much easier. So going through and like maybe at the end of a clinic asking the physician to like teach you how to do the slit lamp, like how to use, there's so many different techniques and like little tips and tricks you can use. Taking the time, advocate for yourself, but don't throw off the clinic flow.
Thank you. And next question is from Dylan Shockey. What was the best way to prepare before interviewing for medical school, and what helped you stand out during interviews? I think you briefly mentioned what helped you stand out.
Yeah, I think it was just being passionate about things. I mean, if you're someone, they're all virtual interviews still, I assume. Practice virtually. Like if you have a friend that is willing to do that with you, like set up a Zoom call and give them some of the most like commonly asked questions. Practice, practice, practice. Anything in life, whether it's practice tests, whether it's, seeing patients, it's all just like volume. It's kind of like I know we're in actual intelligence, but like when you train an artificial intelligence, you give it practice, you give it samples. You just need to like think about your answers. You don't want to come off rehearsed. So I found that a good way to do that is instead of like practicing by writing out your full answers and memorizing them, make bullet points. And like, so when someone asks you why medicine, have three bullet points that you need to get to, but make it so that the path is different every time. So you get from point A to point B and then from point B to point C, but you can take different paths each time. So it comes off a little bit more naturally. So you don't sound super rehearsed.
Yeah, I think I've also I personally use chat,
Hmm.
the mode where you can talk to them, and that
Yeah,
helped me a lot on my interviews. Yeah, so
that's
that's
great
an
advice.
option. Yeah.
Very good
Okay.
advice.
Thank you, Dylan. The next question is from Long Giants Lee. How would you recommend standing out during sub internships?
Yeah, so kind of like I was talking about earlier, like try to build up your didactic knowledge, learn how to read OCTs, do those practice ones. Like look up OCT practice. It's like one of the first one. They have like 100 plus like retina OCTs alone. Learn how to read OCTs, learn how to read a pentacam. All that's on iGuru. So have your didactic understanding well thought out. Again, look at the Eyes Have It. Look at all of those resources I talked about. Didactic knowledge is a really good way to impress someone. And then another way is like if you know how to do the physical exam, it's really impressive. And I think the best way to go about that, especially the slit lamp exam, is be systematic. Chris Yang gave me this advice when I was doing mine, and it seems overwhelming at the beginning, but anytime you open an ophthalmology note, it's all the same template, right? It's external exam, which is like, do the eyes grossly when I'm looking at you have any like, can I have any noticeable ptosis or any like large craniofacial deformities around the orbits? And then, okay, go lids and lashes. You work your way from the outside going in, right? Lids and lashes. Okay, I look at the lids and the lashes on both eyes. Then I look at the conj and the sclera. And then I look at the cornea. And then I look at the iris. Then I check the pupil. And while I'm doing that, I'll check for any transillumination defects in the iris. Then I'll check the anterior chamber. Then I'll check the lens, check for any like cataract. Then I look at the anterior vitreous, and then I do the posterior segment exam. So if you can break it up and like be systematic, you could be wrong in your interpretation. You could say that the cup to disc ratio is 0.8 when in actuality it's 0.3. They're not going to care if you're sitting there giving them a detailed presentation, be like the lids and lashes, and don't just say normal, but say like, left or right. You know what I mean? Like conj and sclera are white and quiet. The cornea is clear with no visible like defects, no TIDs. AC is deep and quiet. Like learn the terminology, like and like try to sound like you know what you're talking about, even though you don't need to. Like, so be systematic would be my advice in your exam and your presentations and everything. And you don't need to be perfect, but practice, 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 advocate for yourself, and things will work out.
Thank you. So we are close to our end time. We encourage you to stay if you can. We're going to answer the last question and then do our conclusions, and then we'll go ahead and end the meeting maybe in about 5 to 7 minutes. But the last question is from Isaac Aquino. Hello, considering how the ophthalmology field is developing and changing with AI integration and new tech, what are some skills that are especially important to learn as an undergrad?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think if you want to learn how to code, that's a really good tool. You don't even need to be a perfect coder, like vibe coding. If you can figure out how to vibe code something and like utilize it with a bunch of AI tools, that's great. Um, Honestly, I think soft skills are really important. Like being able to network with people and converse with them and connect with them is really, really important. Whether that's mentors or patients, like you need to be able to, at the end of the day, just be a compassionate and understanding and an empathetic human. I think that'll carry you much farther than any other sort of like hard skills like coding. Anyone can really code if you have like whatever the vibe coding tool. If you use Claude, Claude can code for you. So, if you're passionate about artificial intelligence, though, do that. Like, do what you're passionate about. But in terms of skills that are important to learn, like, I think joining my pre-med fraternity and other social organizations in college did way more for me than like on a soft skill basis than anything else. Like that it matters so much, so much because on your third year rotations, a lot of it is like, can you interact with residents and like not bother them? Be nice and be friendly and be someone who's easy to talk with and easy to work with. That stuff matters a lot more than like the hard skills at times that you're bringing to the table.
Alrighty, so that concludes the Q&A. I'd like to thank Aidin. Thank you so much for joining us, for sharing your insights and the process of medical school and residency. I'm sure many of you have been inspired by his journey and are much more clear on what you need to do to get where you want to be. I also want to thank all of you for joining us, those who listened in and asked questions. We greatly value your support and look forward to seeing you during the next webinar. Lastly, regarding the OCEP Career Pathway series, we will be inviting folks to this online Q&A who've either walked the path of med school or optometry school, residency or fellowship, or those who can just guide you on your path. This would include medical and optometry school admission committee faculty members, as well as directors from various ophthalmology and optometry departments, who will be able to provide their thoughts on what they look for in candidates for admission to med school and optometry schools. Um, in addition, for the audience, if you have any suggestions about who we should invite and what you'd like to hear in these webinars, please let us know. You can feel free to email Rachel at info@retinaglobal.org. Thank you and good night. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank
And
you guys for
Aidin.
having me. It was really nice to meet you guys. Keep staying involved with OSEP. bring your own ideas to the table. It's a fantastic, fantastic organization, not only for like your guys' opportunities, but I mean, if you guys have volunteered there, you know the impact that you have in the lives of the patients that attend the clinic. So I highly recommend continuing to work there. Yeah, best of luck on your journeys. Thank you again, Gabby. Thank you, Dr.
Yep,
Agarwal.
of course.